Hi, Catherine.
Hello.
So, the purpose, if you will remember originally, is to discuss KPH2 and the notes that all of you had hopefully submitted to Warren. So we could do that first. But in the interim, so much has gotten referred to this committee. It's crazy. So I think it's worth a discussion after KPH2 about the role of the committee, how we respond, what are the protocols and so forth. But I think we should start with KPH2, Warren, if you don't mind.
I don't mind. So at this point, I've received comments from Marty, from Nancy Kelly, from Ann, and from Catherine with their thoughts on our site visit and sort of background information. And I want to put together a summary to circulate to our committee to review. And then if the committee approves, that will go to the planning board for their consideration in advance of their next hearing. I think a continued public hearing on this, which I believe is May 17th. Is that correct?
Correct. That's correct.
So in general, I mean, Nancy had some great background information with some historic photographs mentioning that there was, in addition to the miniature railway that Vincent installed, also a station at one time for Ferncliff on the Rhinecliff and New England Railroad, which she didn't have a picture of, but pretty sure that was there. Just kind of an interesting historical detail. She noted the Astor Tunnel under Clifton Point. I don't know whether that's actually now part of this property or an adjacent property.
No, it's not. It's part of Annie's property.
It is, right. And then she had some images of the barns in their earlier location and some silos, which were very interesting. And you know, the only kind of comment she had about this, well, she had a couple of interesting observations. One was there is a rumor, if you will, that the stone that was used to build the Rhinebeck High School came from the Ferncliff mansion when it was taken down, although the images of that mansion all seem to show what appear to be a stucco or brick building. And the other thing she noted is that the plan for the property has a lot of trails and mazes and things that she said might be a little more than appropriate for an estate landscape, but we'll touch on that as we go through some of the other comments that people made here. So moving along, Anne gave a very nice summary of the various points that we stopped at on the tour with her recommendation for the need for additional archaeological investigation follow-up at each of those places, or not, as seemed warranted based on earlier work that had been done there. And I think I probably don't need to edit that at all. That can just be part of our recommendation. Catherine had articulated, I think, the feelings that a number of us felt that there seemed to be some issues with the moving driveways around, the miniature train, a few other things. It seemed maybe not quite in consonant with their stated purposes of recreating the historic Astor landscape. She also noted that by having the railway go onto the neighbor's property to the north, it seemed like it was claiming that property. Now, it may be that the current owner of this site has an option on that adjacent property if and when the neighbor decides to sell it. But in the meantime, having multiple estates along the riverfront in Rhinebeck as opposed to one vast estate seems preferable, and preserving the appearance of that. And she also had questions about the opening the view to the river. Is that really is that accurate in historical terms, and is it really appropriate in terms of both the view out of the property and the view into the property from across the river or on the river? The most detailed comments, and I think in some respect very thought-provoking ones, were summarized by Marty. And the interesting point that he thought about and articulated over a course of maybe a week or two is that even though the cultural landscape report we have, which is quite detailed, talks about influences on the historic design and the romantic and the other style, there, that it didn't seem that they were actually embracing that in their own sort of recreation or envision how they've envisioned the estate moving forward. And the most significant gap is nearly how they're treating the site of the original mansion, and of course the adjacent tea house that was built subsequent to the mansion coming down. Marty, I think, very correctly observed that the Ehlers landscape for the property was laid out based on the siting of the mansion. And the mansion can be presumed to have been in the most prominent and prime spot on the property in terms of its view, both from the park and its views out to the river. And in fact, the house was taken down, and sometime later, the tea house was built behind the site of the house, and a garden was there. But it's clear that that was always seen as the best location on this entire estate for a house. And the fact that a labyrinth is being proposed to sit on the ground, generally in that location, but without necessarily paying any homage to the foundation design of the original house, seems rather a trivial gesture. And the most significant thing about this is that the current residence, Astor Courts, was of course conceived of as a recreation pavilion when the mansion was still standing. And as Marty very aptly described it, it was just a stage set. It was a facade that you were seeing as a distance, much like a Gloriette monument, in a European park seen from the main residence. And it really was purely a facade behind which this recreation pavilion sat. And one of the things that drives that home is, if you're familiar with Astor Courts, you realize that the balcony in the back of it really wasn't there so you could view the river. It was there so you could look at the grass tennis court. It was really not about the siting of the house. And so now that is the main house, that's fine, but that's not what the landscape was designed around. This was a distant point in the landscape, and there's really nothing that stops you as you proceed through this park at the location of the mansion. And it seems that, that's a very critical piece that's missing. The tea house, which has been, modified by a couple of owners since then, doesn't really substitute for that. And in a sense, taking out the parking area between it and the pool that was installed and making it a garden, even though there was a garden there, and we understand the point about the Astors change things all the time. Yes, everyone that has property changes things regularly, but there seems to be, again, in the analysis, there seems to be a gap in understanding, reflection, or intent, or all of the above, for how they proceed with this project going forward. And I probably haven't summarized that very well, but I've certainly tried to take the gist of the discomfort that I think both Marty and Catherine have sort of articulated, that in this whole plan, what we're creating or recreating isn't what was there. It's something rather new, a very linear space, which is not how the park was originally perceived. And the question is, how far is it appropriate for us to go in? I mean, it's fine for us to raise questions at the planning board. We're an advisory body to the planning board, say, we think this needs more study. We think that the applicant should consider this or that. But can or should we do more? Do we need to suggest that a major piece of this be reconsidered, be put on hold? So that's kind of where we are at the moment. And I guess we need feedback from everybody, including Marty, what the next step is, as I try to put together some rather abbreviated summary, coherent summary for the planning board to consider.
So, Warren, before Marty weighs in and everybody else, and I know that it's probably not appropriate and I've tried not to speak to these issues, but I want to point out, Marty, that what came to be called Astor Courts was in fact a rendering by Stanford White, or an homage to, as Catherine will remember, the Grand Trianon in Versailles. And the tea house, when it was built, was meant to be after the Belvedere, and the Belvedere in Versailles that had a relationship to the Grand Trianon. So the two buildings were met, and I think Catherine will remember this because she was involved with Sam White and I, were meant to relate one to the other after the main mansion was torn down. So I want to just be sure that gets into the discussion. Okay. Thank you.
Warren, is it appropriate for me at this point to weigh in, or shall I wait?
Well, at some point you've got to win. If I mean, I'd be interested, Catherine. Based on what Kathy just said and your own experience with the property, have I captured the thoughts you had, or is there something more you'd like to add at this point?
No, you captured it. One of my main concerns was having the appearance of one landowner
Mm-hmm.
on all the whole section.
Right.
And even though the tea house and Astor Courts were one, Blue Brindle was not, I don't think. Do I
Brindle
have
Brook.
that right?
Brindle Brook. Yeah.
So I wouldn't like it to look like the whole town is owned by one compound, to have that compound feeling.
Well, and just to speak to that from what I know about the planning board, these properties that have been acquired by KPH2 in one way or another are held in individual LLCs. So Brindlebrook is one, Astor Courts is another, the Tea House property is one, and the business of land acquisition from any is just that, it's attached to the larger tea house acquisition. So, but they're individually held, which must be a tax purpose or whatever. but
Right.
they-
Liability.
Yeah,
But if the driveways don't clearly go to the different places, and if the railroad goes over the boundary lines into the next property, it kind of lessens the appearance that it's individual estates.
true.
It gives
Nancy,
you the feeling of a monopoly.
That's it is.
As it was originally,
Yeah,
and then
Right.
some.
Right. Okay, anybody else? If not, the floor is yours, Marty.
Okay, when I was up at the tea house in front of the pool, and I raised the question of the site of the house, I had a physical sense or discomfort when I was in that space. And I think it was because I was trying to reconcile the cultural landscape study with what I was experiencing. And having lived through this period of change where cultural landscapes became as significant as the buildings themselves, and it did not used to be that way. That has happened over a number of years. But given the amount of effort that was put into this cultural landscape study, it's quite obvious that it is extremely important. And as part of the greater historic district along the river, these great estates are most unusual survivals and very, very important. So when I was up there on that site, I was trying to reconcile what was graceful, what was picturesque, all of the things that we talked about in this, and all of the things that the Hudson Valley is known for. And although the driveway moves around a little bit as it goes around the nursing home, Arch Care, by the time you came in that lower gate, and then we came by that rather rugged angular stone wall, which was not picturesque, is the driveway just seems to struggle on and go up and down, but it doesn't have the sweeps. It doesn't have the turns. It doesn't have the romance. And the reason is that the circulation was developed in a very circular mode around the house. And the house, as I mentioned in my study, typical of all river houses, would have had two fronts, a road front and a river front. And suddenly what we're presented with is not only not the house, and not only not a graceful connection, because what basically has happened is someone has joined one side of the, I'm going to call it a rotary around the house or the circle, to the other side by coming across. And it was never meant to come across. Coming across, the drive coming across where it does literally means it would have moved through the house. In fact, the drive swept to the east into a very broad parking court, which would have been the view of the Ehlers landscape. And that is what Ehlers created. And on the other side, there would have been a view toward the river. We can't do much about the view to the river, but it is this sweep and this motion around. And if you look at some of the historic pictures in the report, there were sculptures around there. There were all sorts of objects. I mean, it was really, really a lovely spot. The forecourt that they're talking about creating up at Astor Courts was actually the forecourt that was in front of this house. So we have forecourts and formal arrival areas popping up all over the place. And as was said, labyrinths and everything else, but no place to pause where historically this entire park was created to pause. So my question really is, I see further development in the area of the original mansion. I don't care if it's labyrinths or moving driveways or moving parking courts or anything else, is that further development of that area should not be done without more study. And in contrast to what I think Catherine said, but not disagreement, I'm willing to give up on the railroad going into the adjacent property, and I'm willing to give up the labyrinths behind the house, which I don't see as necessary, but you know, the man owns the land and he wants to build them because they're out of the critical area. But it's these extensive changes and the doing what everyone wants. One's going to create a court, one's going to create a labyrinth. What we're doing is we're being pushed further away from the river. It becomes, with every step, it's more of a Chinese wall in this area where you would have been able to drive around the house and you would have caught a glimpse of the river as you drove around the house, because they show in the view sheds that the house had a view of the river. So as you went around the west side of the house, you would have had a view. Interestingly enough, the report neglects to show the view to the east of the house, even though that view is represented in a number of the historic maps and almanacs. So all that I'm saying is, if I had my druthers of what was historically appropriate, because we're not going to get everything we want, but this is a very, very important property. And I could argue it's a litmus test for us, because there's no more important property in terms of Rhinebeck's identity historically, is that there should be no more development in the sensitive area. I would say everything else could proceed, and this area needs additional study and explanation, or it invalidates the Ehlers landscape and how it was meant to be viewed. That's the long and the short.
So Marty, can I ask you, when you say labyrinth, do you mean the mazes that they intend to create, or are
Well,
you talking?
I had actually, I mean, I went at this very, I thought gingerly for me. I I said, are you going to delineate in front of the house at the original house site, the floor plan or the footprint or something to indicate that this was the house? And he said, oh, no, 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 that's long gone. We're just going to put a garden here. Now, this idea of indicating a footprint is something that has been done in the profession for years, in the absence of recreating actual buildings that are gone. So I sort of felt that I was giving a cue, which is you could go and stand on that spot and say, if you were the Astors and you were looking out of their front entrance, this is the view you would have seen. Just as you go at Olana and look out particular view sheds that all of these houses were meant to have. And there was no pickup on the significance of the house site at all, which is certainly the primary site on the property. Instead, it was what we're going to do to enhance the tea house. And the tea house is not historically significant in its present form. So I feel that the footprint of that and its gardens and its pool and everything else gets larger and larger, and it's encroaching on the historic landscape. And that may all be that we have left as the historic landscape, but let's preserve it.
Well, two things I would just add, excuse me, Catherine. One is that with the design of and the architecture of the Stanford White Building, Astor Courts, which was referred to as the casino, as it should have been, there were landscape designs for it, including the courtyard in front, as Catherine will remember. Nothing that they intend to do across in front of the tea house relates to that. And they have already, decimated what the original courtyard was anyway. And the main thing I would say, and then I'm trying really hard not to say too much, is that there are plans existent for the mansion as it was. There are plans existent for the garden in front. Nancy knows this better than me because they all got given to the Rhinebeck Historical Society. So all of that exists. The truth is, over the space of 2 owners and then some, none of that was respected at the tea house, either from its original, design, never mind what happened afterwards. So how much this committee has the ability to speak to, I don't know, but maybe Warren could comment on that.
That's really one of the issues I think that we as a committee have to come to terms with, both on this project and every subsequent project. We can make observations, we can make suggestions for things to the planning board and the applicant to consider. But I think that's about the extent of it. We can say they did a great job or not such a good job, but probably find a more tactful way to say that if that's how we feel about it. And I think, again, it's entirely appropriate to say, we think these are significant aspects of the landscape that either have been overlooked or haven't been given the attention they deserve. I don't think it's at all realistic to expect them to undo the changes to the tea house, certainly the structural changes, whether they have a parking court in front of it, which the last owner created, or put a garden there. I'm not sure it makes much difference in terms of the historic landscape there. But the question is, as I think Marty made a point, that whether it's a litmus test or not, this is a very significant case that's been referred to us, a very significant application referred to us as the planning board. And what we do here will affect our credibility going forward on this and other applications. So I'm a little hesitant to overstep our mandate and bounds. I think it's fine, again, to point things out, to raise questions, say reconsider this, that, or the other. but I don't think we have the charge to suggest that the planning board put any particular project on hold while the applicant goes back and comes up with an approach that we think maybe is better. I think we can simply point out perceived shortcomings and make some recommendations. But I think we need to be clear about that. Huh?
I'm sorry, who requested the cultural landscape study?
Planning board.
Okay. So I guess what I'm trying to do is I would ask that this be presented as such, is that what is being done is not a logical outcome. I'm not saying opposing.
Mhm.
It does not follow with the cultural landscape report, which makes a big deal of the landscape, a very big deal of Ehlers and of the placement of things and how it was meant to be viewed and the view sheds. And all that I would ask is, if those things are important, that we ask for additional clarification of how, in fact, it is consistent with the report, which, as I said, I find it very inconsistent. And as I said, I find inconsistent, glaringly inconsistent, the fact that there is no view from the mansion site of that park. I mean, that became so glaring to me in that report that I don't know how anyone could have missed it to begin with. I mean, you unfolded this thing in front of a mansion house and there isn't a single arrow or view shed. So I just think that we've gone to all this effort. Someone felt it was significant enough, and therefore we should give it its due of addressing the fact that, and as I said, where I find myself particularly challenged by this is we had a site visit so late in the process. We didn't have much time to digest the report. It's a large report. It's not the only thing on our table. And as I said, we came to the report, and a week later, we're supposed to have synthesized the report, and we're supposed to comment on how that translates into what is being done and whether we're comfortable with it or not. And I guess my big thing is where was that park supposed to be viewed from? And why is that not incorporated in the report? Because I think that it changes things drastically. Otherwise, it's the idea of a cultural landscape report or a historic structures report, of which I used to do many. If it sits on a shelf and it's not used, it's a waste of money. And we used to tell people that, they would do these large reports for funding purposes and do nothing with them. So I just think it's a real, as I said before, a litmus test. I've said everything I'm thinking on it, and it's up to others to decide which way to go.
So wait, Nancy, excuse me 1 second, and then please feel free to weigh in. Marty, when you refer to cultural landscape report, are you referring to that from the applicant, or are you referring to Charles' report?
I'm talking about the huge report that we have with all the view sheds and the
applicant.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, Nancy.
I just wanted to say, Marty, that we're very fortunate to have your background and viewpoint. And I do agree that if they're going to be concerned about a landscape, coastal landscape, that they should be focusing more on the mansion site, and that some of the suggestions that have been made should be considered, and that we could approve of other areas on the report and have a little more study done to this particular area.
So, Warren, I don't think the master plan comes before the planning board until sometime later on in May. Anne, are you there?
Yeah, could I
The
make,
business, 1 second, let me just share this with
Okay.
you. The business of all the soil that they dug up for the burial of the lines does come up at the pre-conference session on Monday, because they dug so much soil that it requires a special permit in order to be able to move it. And so that, but you had already passed on that part of the agenda because it had already been disturbed over the years, right? Where they dug the lines. Am I right? Did you not?
are you talking to me?
Yeah, I am talking to you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
okay. They had put on the, across the driveway from where the mansion site is, there was one in the phase 2 archaeological site report. There was a prehistoric site there, which was to be excavated in phase 3. I have not seen the phase 3 report, and that would have a big impact on whether more archaeology should have been done there, because that was one of the things I mentioned in the initial thing that I sent to Warren just on the tree thing there, because there was a site there and they excavated the part that was being, I think it was a leach field for a septic system there, or some kind of piping that required clearance, but they expanded on that considerably. So the other issue is that there hasn't been no archaeology done in the mansion site itself. And when I asked about it, they kind of dismissed it and said, well, it was all taken down, there's nothing there. And in terms of architecture, there's nothing there, but an archaeologist could probably find out a lot about the mansion itself, how it was possibly how it was constructed, and certainly how it was taken down, and that it could add to our general knowledge about the mansion itself. And certainly, I mean, if they're just going to put paving stones on the surface, as they said they were going to do with the labyrinth, the archaeology wouldn't be required. The site could be capped and saved for some future time. But if they did something else in that area, that would be a primary area that would require not just 1, 2, and 2, but it would require full excavation phase 3. So that's, I agree with Marty that is a very, very important part of the whole project and the whole landscape.
I interrupt again because I think my computer's going to kick out. That mansion of the history of Rhinebeck by Tejan says on page 101 that the fieldstone for the high school came from the mansion. And so it's a very, it was reported in the newspapers and all. So it's very strange what happened, where that stone came from.
Well, Nancy, it was the thing that is so difficult, particularly for Catherine and I to consider, is the history of the mansion location and then the tea house that Vincent Astor built, and then what happened with subsequent owners and how it relates to Astor Courts and all that. Probably is worth Warren and Marty and Nancy or whoever all a report that defines all of this and makes the kinds of suggestions that Marty is making. and doing it sooner rather than later because they have already gotten approval for the tree restoration plan and they're already starting that. So this business of what to do about the core concern that Marty has should go in as quickly as possible, in my opinion. Not that I'm not supposed to have an opinion.
I would like to add, in addition to this tree LA, which I don't understand enough about, again, we're coming to this quickly, that LA would have ceased and been relieved as one came into the courts and drives around the house. And I don't think that this drive would have been a continuous LA in that sense, that there would have been view sheds and there would have been relief, and that there isn't going to be relief with what they are intending to do. I mean, they're going to have this line of trees from that lower gate basically up to Astor Courts. And it was never meant to be that confined a space.
Well, to be fair, Marty, I'll
Yep.
just tell you that there are historic documentation, Nancy could,
Yes,
there is images available that define that LA of trees towards Astor Courts from the mansion, and then that does exist, and what
Yeah.
they cut
They're in the
down
report.
by accident and are putting back is historically documented. And they have those pictures.
yes.
It's also
Same.
not really quite accurate to call it an LA in the sense of a formal, they're putting in clusters of trees, which is what was there in the past. But it's certainly not like it's some formal LA that takes you to a point and stops. That wasn't there, and that doesn't seem to be what they're proposing to recreate.
Wait a minute, what? Are you sure?
Well, looking at the images, there seemed to be areas of trees, but it didn't.
So
seem to
if
be
you
the-
looked at the, I know I'm not supposed to talk. This is the last time I will, I swear to God.
Yeah.
If you look at between what was ultimately the tea house down that hill to what is the intervening driveway to Astor Courts that was built later, that, I don't know what else you would call it, but an LA existed, and it existed until they ripped it all out and got in trouble for doing that.
But it existed from the time of the construction of the tea house, you're saying?
You know, it was the 1930s. That image was the
Oh, is
30s.
it?
Yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, whatever.
I mean,
Okay.
I'm saying it wasn't part of the Ehlers plan from what I can tell.
You might be right.
I think
Hard as that is for me to admit.
one of the things I think it's very important that we understand, and I think we have the right to ask, is what are they trying to take this to? What is the end goal, and how does it reflect history? Because it is something that constantly changed and evolved. But I don't have any clear idea of what they're doing except what they feel like doing. Realizing we cannot recreate or capture something completely, what are they trying to capture, A, and B, and this is going to be my last comment because there are other things we have to go over, is how does the Secretary of Interior, Warren, and I don't know this, I'm not setting you up with this question, I just don't know, how do they view cultural landscapes as contributing to a site? Because we should be working with the Secretary of Interior standards. And if eradicating the house site completely and putting gardens over it, moving driveways and stuff is inconsistent, then we have the right, or at least we have the right to ask their staff to interpret what they are doing in that particularly sensitive area and verify that it is consistent with the Secretary of Interior standards, if in fact they apply.
Okay.
Okay, what?
Well, it's easy enough to check and see if the cultural landscape standards are now under that umbrella and how they specifically apply to historic sites that have been altered since then.
So Warren, do you want to try and draft something for the planning board that incorporates everyone's
Yes,
input?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so I'll leave that in your capable hands. Shall we move on from this
I think we should.
particularly painful topic on to the rest of the agenda? I want to bring you guys, if I may, up to date on things that have been in increasing numbers and volume referred to the committee for a variety of different kinds of reasons. The first is to tell you, although I don't have the formal submission, that Wurtemberg Road, Marty, that project has been formally submitted to the planning board, apparently. And on Monday, they will have a second pre-application conference, even though they have already come up with an application. And I'm told by Melody that the application is basically the same as what they outlined before. And so that will require attention on the part of this committee in a significant way, because it's an important site. So that will be coming our way. The hotel, the Rhinecliff Hotel, has, so that's number one, has contiguous to it a house which they are trying to incorporate into the hotel complex on Grinnell. The applicant for work to be done on the exterior of the property on Grinnell has asked for an assessment from this committee as to what they will be facing from a historical perspective, and we don't have that yet either. So that will be coming. 524 Mill Road, which for those of us who have been here for a while know as Sam Hall's house, that, and Nancy, you could speak to this, that property is a very important property. It has on it an historic barn that had some illegal work done there that needs to be by the prior owner, that needs to be corrected by the new owner, together with the intent of moving the driveway and moving a 19th century playhouse, all of which Anne will trigger, as they have been warned, among other things, archaeological issues. So there's those three. There is a plot of land on Russell Avenue in Rhinecliff, which has been referred to the committee. It is an tract that has not ever been built on, and they too want archaeological input and historic and architectural input. So there are four things right there. Rockledge, that we all visited, will appear on the planning board agenda. I want to say it's the next meeting. I think I'm right. It's the next meeting. And so at some point or another, they will be looking for, the board will, input from those of us who were there at the site visit. So there are those things, plus the referrals that I sent to you. I'll tell you one, if you're feeling overwhelmed by all this, I'll tell you one bit of good news. last night, the town board approved the funding for a clerk for the committee, a guy named Sebastian Pilateri. He will work with us for 5 hours a week between now and the end of the year, so we can load him up with work that maybe some of us would otherwise have to do. And then there are the referrals I sent to you. And since I'm on my computer, I have to go, I have to look them up. But one of them is Catherine Whitman's house. So that has been referred to us only because of its location. And I think we wait, Catherine, unless you advise otherwise, to not deal with that with this committee until such time as you're ready for the committee to refer to it. And there is a project in Rhinecliff where the owner is requesting to put a metal roof on a historic building versus the old asphalt roof. That probably at the point in time it comes to the planning board, it will have to respond to. And I think that's it, guys. Nobody gets to quit the committee, okay? Do you hear me now? Nobody. We need all you people.
What if we're committed somewhere, like to an institution?
Yeah, we're all going to be committed to it.
Well, yeah, it's, you know, what I'm finding, and Warren and I have been talking about this, is that this committee is becoming kind of like, in my opinion, the sort of leading edge of, because people have figured out that if they're making an application that has historic or archaeological importance, that if they come to us first before they make a formal application to the planning board, it shortens the procedure.
And they may waste less money by taking some advice in the early stages, because we have a lot of advice to offer.
Well, there is the positive side that you point out, well said. So there is a balance, but it has begun to put us, I think, in a position that feels almost legal in a way, that for a committee that today is advisory, I don't know. I'm not completely comfortable with it, but there you have it.
I have a question for you. Well, do we have an agenda for today?
No, our agenda started out as KPH2 and it just kept getting bigger and bigger.
And what's next on the agenda?
That's it. I'm done.
Okay, if I may weigh in first with a simple request, that we had asked everyone to drive through the Wartenberg Road area and see if anyone on our committee had recommendations about the length of the district. Obviously, we don't know what's happening at the southern end with the resubmittal of that property, but Melody and I are supposed to meet with the county historian. I think his name is Will.
Will Tatum, yeah.
Will Tatum.
Yes, and we wanted our committee as a group to determine the parameters of what we were considering that district. So if I might throw that out before we start on that, that would be helpful.
I did it. I went there and drove it.
Yeah, I've driven it too.
And Nancy sent us her PowerPoint presentation on it too.
Yes, which was excellent.
Yes. So, I mean, my sense is the district should run from the subject property at the southern end up to where Württemberg Road finally rejoins Route 9G. I don't see any reason to admittedly, they're non-contributing structures in there, but there are intermittent contributing structures all the way along, and it would seem odd, given its history as a road of importance and the farms and everything, to curtail it somewhere else.
I'm in agreement.
Does anyone have a different view about the extent of the district?
No.
I
Yeah.
Warren,
Yeah.
the only thing that could alter that is when we do the actual inventory.
Mhm.
If there are too many non-contributing elements or properties that are in close succession, that sometimes ends the district. So
Mhm.
part of what Melody and Will and I will be doing with Nancy's PowerPoint is identifying the properties and then looking at the properties in between those and seeing if they are contributing, non-contributing, and then there's a negative even beyond non-contributing, which is there an intrusion in the district,
Right.
and see where we come out. So that positions us fine. If everyone agrees with that, we can start moving with that. If everyone is happy with that length.
Fine with me.
Yeah, I think that
Okay
needs to be
with
the
me.
starting point. Yeah.
Great. If I might bring up one other thing that I think I've been behind the 8 ball on, but when Kathleen sent the list of additional stuff that we have coming our way, which is frightening. We can't get applications like this anymore. We have to formalize our applications. And I know I said I would work on it, and maybe with a brief meeting amongst a few of us, and maybe with this clerk, we can get something. We need an application that has to be filled out for us. It has to include a plot plan. It has to include photos, okay? This business of getting a written description with 5 boxes checked and asking someone to even respond to it is crazy, at least in my estimate.
Yeah, I think you're right, Marty. And to be fair, we dumped that in your lap. So not that lap. Move your picture up.
The only lap I've got is a large one.
We dumped it in your lap, so you got to figure out what that looks like, because we need to bring order. What's that on the left there? Move that, whatever it is. I don't want to know what that is. Okay. All right. So you need to come up with something, if you will, because you had volunteered before. Wait, let me finish.
Yeah.
Because you had volunteered before, because it really is, in my opinion, and I think too, in Warren's opinion, getting a little out of control. And to be fair to the planning board and the zoning administration and everything else at the town hall, they are under enormous pressure, both by volume of applications, the problem with the zoning administrator being on medical leave, a variety of things. And so if we're going to protect ourselves, I think you're right on about saying, this is the format. If you're going to refer stuff to us, don't just go, oh, by the way, we think you might go look at that. It's got to be something more formal than that. So we will depend on you to do that by tomorrow.
That's fine. When I actually have a whole folder of different districts, and I think what I'm going to do is scan them in some semi-organized way, which is all I can be expected to do, and meaning with my capabilities, and we'll
give it
look
to the
at them,
clerk.
and we'll look at the, well, I think our group should look at them for content,
Right.
from an archaeological standpoint, from a historical standpoint, et cetera, and decide what we want to add or delete, and then pass them to the clerk to synthesize.
Okay,
And
great. That's
I-
great. Thank you,
I-
Marty.
Have one other comment that came up in the meeting today that might simplify our lives, because anything that is redundant that we can avoid, I think we should avoid, is the issue of a roof. If a roof has the historic material on it, either wood shingle or slate or standing seam metal, then we should weigh in on it. If a roof is being changed from asphalt shingles, quite frankly, it's a later installation. I don't know what they do, and it's going to be all the time. These metal roofs are popular. They live their life. I can let them go as being one less thing. To review a church that has polychrome slate roof, yes.
Great, thank you. I agree with you on that, and if it's all right with the rest of you, we'll pass that on. And I just need to go back to 524 Mill Road. That applicant has requested a site visit. Warren, they wanted to move from Friday to Monday or Tuesday at 11 o'clock. Can any of you people go?
Probably not.
Yeah, I know, jury duty, but Warren, can you go? Or Nancy, can you go? Where'd Nancy go? She's still there?
She said her computer was acting up.
That's right.
All right.
Yeah, I should be able to do that.
Which day? Monday? Let's get it out of the.
Tuesday would be my preference, actually.
All right, great. And then anybody else wants to go just for? No? Okay. I'll try to get Tuesday at 11 a.m. Warren, and I'll let you know, and I'll try and get Nancy involved.
Right.
And so to summarize then, I think we have more or less touched on everything.
I had one question, and I know Grassmere is kind of on hold right now, but I have driven myself crazy trying to find Appendix H, which is the archaeology report, and I can't find it anywhere in all those documents. And there is a summary of the archaeological report in, I forget, one of the findings files. And the most recent one that I found of that was from 2016. But the document that has the appendices does not seem to be there unless I've missed it. And given how many there are, I could have, but I really have gone through a lot of
Okay. Let me ask Gretchen to find that for you and forward it on. If she can, and if she can't, she'll go to the applicant. Okay. Anything else, guys? Thank you for being so patient about this. Marty, thank you for helping us bring some kind of order to the process. I will only warn you about one other thing, guys, that I think is ultimately going to appear in our agenda, and that is the change of the status from committee to formal board. But we will give you a whole lot of notice if that gets raised, which I think it probably will at some point, because that means there's more authority with a board than there is with a committee. Okay. Anything else? Anybody else? That's it. Thank you for your patience.
Motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Oh, thank you, Fred. May I have a motion to adjourn?
I second
So
the
moved.
motion.
No, you got to make one to begin with. Somebody make one. Catherine, do it.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you. And a second.
I'll second the motion.
Well done. All in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
Aye.
Perfect.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you, Fred.
Bye.
Bye-bye,
Good night,
guys.
Jeff.